and interact as much as you can for an enriching experience. It's our great pleasure to introduce our first very distinguished speaker, Mr. A.R. Venkatachalapathy. Mr. Chalapathy is a professor at the Madras Institute of Development Studies, Chennai, and has taught at universities in Tirunelveli, Chennai, and Chicago. Apart from his scholarly work in English, he has also written over 30 books in Tamil. Today, we're utterly grateful to experience a talk based on Sir's book, Swadeshi Steam, V.O. Chidambaram Pillai, and Battle Against the British Maritime Empire. His book talks about the rivalry between Swadeshi Steam Navigation Company and British India Steam Navigation. An interesting story where a lawyer named V.O. Chidambaram Pillai had a novel idea that challenged the might of the empire itself. Now, without further ado, let's welcome Mr. Chalapathy with a huge round of applause.
Vanakkam, good evening. It's my absolute pleasure to be here this evening. This is my very first visit to Ahmedabad, but I've heard a lot about this institution, except my brother-in-law 20 years ago when he decided to change horses in midstream. He came here to study. It was not then an university. Then some years ago, my goddaughter came here to study, and she had only nice things to say about this institution. So I'm delighted to be here. My thanks go to my dear friend A. Srivatsan, who first suggested that I come here. I'm also delighted that Trideep Shurud, a scholar whom I admire a lot, because he's a scholar whose area of work is not flashy or anything, and it is very calm, quiet, meticulous work. This is the kind of scholarship that I admire, and I'm so delighted that I could also see him this afternoon. I thank Diana, who put everything for this evening. So I'm very delighted to be here. So without much ado, let me jump headlong into the topic of today's talk. This is not going to be the only marine metaphor that I'm going to be using today, because that's the subject of the talk. Are there any students here who are from Tamil Nadu? Okay. So most people from Tamil Nadu would be familiar with this face and also the name. VOC, V.O. Chidambaram Pillai, or VAVUC, is a household name in Tamil Nadu. If you go to any town, village in Tamil Nadu, you will have a VOC Nagar, VOC Street, VOC Park, etc. But outside of Tamil Nadu, his name is completely unknown. So there are no VOC Street in Delhi or Calcutta or any other part of India. But I have ended up writing a 500-page book on this man. Why? Does he actually deserve to have a 500-page book in English? So VOC, or VAVUC as he is called in Tamil, the moment you mention this name in South India, two images will come to your mind. One is the moniker by which he is known, called Kappalotiya Tamilan, the Tamil who navigated a ship. Then the other moniker by which he is referred to is called Sekkidutha Semmal. That is the great man who pulled an oil mill. So two physical objects come to one's mind when the name of VOC is mentioned in Tamil Nadu. The ship and the oil mill. And that is the crux of the story. So what did he actually do? So in the beginning of the 20th century, in 1906, this man actually launched a shipping company. Yes, you got it right. In 1906, he launches a shipping company. So what is the context of this? If you go back into history, we all know of India's great and glorious civilizational past. And the glories of civilizational past are usually judged by the empires that kings build. Unfortunately or fortunately, that is how we measure greatness. But if you look at the great empires of India, whether it is the Mauryan Empire or the Gupta Empire or the Mughal Empire, the only exception is the Chola Empire, which I will come to shortly. All these empires were terrestrial empires. They were not naval powers. So even though India has a very long history of maritime activity, it is often restricted to the coastline and the shores. And if you look at Indian Ocean trade, until the Portuguese came in the 16th century, Indian Ocean trade was dominated by the Arabs. After the Portuguese came, the Portuguese became a naval might, and they were a very brutal force. They were worse than the pirates that they displaced. Following the Portuguese, the Dutch, then the French and the English, they all became very important players in the Indian Ocean trade because it was very closely tied to colonialism. This is a story we all know. Something dramatically happens in the 1830s and 40s. Instead of the sailing ships which for a very long time, for millennia, depended on the change in the monsoon winds to move about in the seas, with the discovery of steam and the invention of steam engines, by the 1840s, you had steamships in the Indian Ocean. The steamships dramatically changed the naval scene because the ships can now be bigger. They are not anymore dependent on the capricious winds, the monsoons, to move about. So by this time, Britain is the world's largest naval power. Their writ ran over all the oceans in the world, and not only their naval ships but also their mercantile ships ruled the seas. They had displaced all other powers. And at this time, by the 1840s, therefore, in India, we have the beginnings of organized capitalist development in shipping, and you had two big shipping companies. One was called the British India Steam Navigation Company, and other the Peninsular and Oriental Steam Navigation Company. Between the two, they ruled practically all the seas in the world. Other changes were also taking place in the 1840s and 50s. Very importantly, you had the invention of telegraph. Wireless telegraphy ensured that information could be passed, exchanged in almost real time. So, the unsafe and risky nature of the shipping enterprise was now, brought more into control. In almost all Indian languages, one of the idioms that is often used to refer to, calamities is, suppose you are sitting crestfallen in your home, your mother is going to ask, for instance in Tamil, Yenda kappal kavandu pochu, which ship has sunk? Why are you looking so glum and gloomy? Is a idiom that can be found in most Indian languages, or perhaps even in other languages. So the sinking of a ship could spell doom. So what happens with the introduction of wireless telegraphy? Because information can be exchanged in almost real time, costs of insurance also came down very dramatically. All this basically meant that bigger ships, faster travel, cheaper insurance, quick communication, all ultimately boiled down to the fact that your profits could increase very dramatically. So, in this context, the other opportunities that are being opened up by colonialism becomes available. By the 1840s, for instance, slavery, formal slavery is completely abolished, and a new form of slavery comes up, what is called the indentured labor. Please look it up. So instead of selling oneself into labor for a lifetime and for life after life, indentured labor was a new system by which laborers, most of them from India and also from China, went all over the world to work in plantations, monocultures, where they sell their labor for 5 years at a time under contracts. So this was as bad as slavery, if not worse. So in fact, there is one 19th century writer has mentioned that, in no culture is there any expiation for matricide. If one kills one's mother, there is no prayashchit for that. But this man said that if you work for 5 years as an indentured labor in a plantation, the sin of matricide would be wiped out. It was how brutal it was. So millions and millions of people traveled the seas to become indentured labor. This was many times more than the transatlantic slave trade of the 17th and 18th centuries. All this traffic went through British ships. This was the monopoly of the British Shipping Company, and also, for instance, the British India Steam Navigation Company also had a contract from the East India Company for mail, for transferring, for carrying postage, which basically covered all their fixed costs. You can see this is how colonialism and imperialism work. Everything gets centralized. All profit-making avenues come together. And so by the 1850s, these big shipping companies rule the seas. And the power of these shipping companies came to the fore when in 1857-58, the Great Rebellion took place. Troops were moved by the British India ships, that is the British-owned ships. What British India Steam Navigation Company effectively did was killed all indigenous native shipping firms. So just imagine the peninsular India, all across peninsular India, the Coromandel coast. Sorry, I am singing the praise of the Coromandel coast sitting on the west coast here. But the Coromandel coast was far more lucrative than even the west coast trade. The tide turns only when in 1869 the Suez Canal is opened. Only then, the capital of the maritime capital of India shifts from Calcutta to Mumbai. So you find what by about 1850s and 60s, British India Steam Navigation Company and Peninsular and Oriental Steam Navigation Company have a stranglehold, and there are a number of small ports all over the Coromandel coast. All of them are systematically destroyed. So until that point, small traders in the hinterland, they would come to the small ports on the Coromandel coast, and they would wait for ships that were passing by. Whenever they found a ship going by, they would take out an umbrella and open it, and immediately the ship would stop, like your auto rickshaws or buses. They would send a boat, and then the merchandise would be shipped. They would go to, either Calcutta port or Madras port or bigger ports, and then they would sail. What British India Steam Navigation Company did was that so they joined hands with the other new great locomotive technology. Remember, by 1853, the first trains were plying in India. So in South India, the Southern Indian Railway, they built a network of huge network of rails, connected all the major towns and ports. The British India Steam Navigation Company joined hands with South Indian Railway and ensured that all the small coastal port towns were destroyed. So now all a merchant had to do was anywhere in the hinterland could just go book the goods in the nearest railway station, and the merchandise would go by train to a port town, Calcutta, Chennai, Visakhapatnam, whatever, and then they would be shipped out into the seas. So in a period of about 10 to 20 years, none of the small thriving ports, which was the hallmark of the Coromandel coast for centuries, they were completely destroyed. So by the 1880s, there was no challenge to the British India Steam Navigation Company. So this is the scene, the high noon of British imperialism. So now by 1905, beginning of the 20th century, all students of history would be familiar with the partition of Bengal and what happened subsequently. The Swadeshi movement was born. The Swadeshi movement had three key programmatic points. One was to develop indigenous enterprise. Second was to boycott British enterprise. And third was to develop national education. So just recall your history lessons from your school. So rise of the Swadeshi movement. But what did actually the Swadeshi movement translate into? Swadeshi enterprise in those days, because capital was in short supply. India was a poor country. It had been deindustrialized in the 19th century. There were very few rich people, practically no industrialists. So there was very little capital. So when the Indian National Congress, after its Benares and Calcutta Congress sessions, called for the rise of indigenous industries, what it actually translated into was people all over Bengal and parts of Maharashtra, Punjab and South India, all that they did was they produced indigenous candles. They made shirt buttons. They made soap. They made washing soap. They made bathing soap. They made their own cigarettes and beedis. This was what Swadeshi enterprise actually meant when the Swadeshi movement was. But it was of great symbolic importance. But this was what industry actually turned out to be. But something dramatic happened, not in Calcutta, the birthplace of Swadeshi movement, not in Maharashtra, where you had the emergence of Bal Gangadhar Tilak as a major mass leader, not in Punjab, where you had the rise of big leaders like Lajpat Rai and Ajit Singh. Deep down south, you look at Thoothukudi, in English it is spelled as Tuticorin, it is Thoothukudi. In that port town, this man said he wanted to jump into Swadeshi enterprise. And what did he wanted to do? Did he want to make soaps? Did he want to make needles? Did he wanted to make safety pins? He said no. He said we should run a shipping line. That's what he talked about. And to understand that, we have to go into the background of, so Thoothukudi or Tuticorin at that time was the 5th largest port in undivided India. It had a thriving trade with Colombo. It was substantial trade was going on. Cotton was a very important product that was being shipped. After the American Civil War, when cotton supply between American South and American North and also Britain was disrupted, it was cotton from South India that was transported. And there was other forms of trade, salt, cotton, oil cakes, cattle, whole range of things were being shipped. So it was a thriving market. But there was one problem with this. All this trade was in the hands of the British India Steam Navigation Company, and they worked through another very nepotistic system of agents. In all the port towns, they had their own men, mostly Scottish men, as their agents. So here in the south also the same thing happened. They had some Scottish agents were ruling the roost. And to add insult to injury, literally, this British India Steam Navigation Company not only monopolized the trade, but racial insults, racist abuse was a everyday experience of the traders in places like Tuticorin. So in this context, in 1906, the rise of the Swadeshi movement, the first time this man suggests that to handle this issue, we should involve ourselves directly into shipping. So out of the blue, in 1906, we have a small newspaper report from Colombo's Ceylon Observer and later in the Hindu, which talks vaguely about, this small-time pleader, small-time lawyer from Tuticorin, who has come to Colombo and who is talking about Swadeshi enterprise. But nobody at that point takes it seriously. Any big project that Indians moot is always ridiculed. And in the Tamil case, there is Tamil saying, Tamils are characterized by Aramba Surattanam. That is, in the beginning, they make a big dance and show of things. We will do that, we will do this, we will bend the sky into a rainbow, we will make ropes out of sand, all kinds of, fancy proposals would be made. But after a few months, there will be no sign of these big projects. So when the first stories came about the launch of a shipping line, nobody took it seriously, and least of all because this man was not a businessman. Firstly, he came from a landholding community. As far as his education went, he was only a matriculate. He was not even a full-time advocate. He was a pleader. Pleader was a position that a matriculate could achieve by writing an exam which would certify him to be eligible for practicing in the lower level courts. So this is what this man was. Came from a good landholding family with no trading or business experience. What little we know until this point in 1906, actually we don't know anything about him in 1906. Only when he comes into slow prominence, the police and the CID dig up his past. That's when first we get to know that somewhere in 1898 he had participated in a Congress meeting. And later historians like me found out that 30-40 years later, he says that at the age of 21 he had come to read the works of Lokmanya Bal Gangadhar Tilak. So he has that. Then he wrote a autobiography. I'm going to be talking about not just what he did, but also about the documents and sources that went into the writing of this book, because that is a very important part of the story, which will emerge, I hope, in the course of the talk. So he says in his autobiography, which he wrote when he was in prison, he wrote this autobiography in verse form, in poetry. He says that he used to read newspapers extensively. So he must have read the Hindu, he must have read the Madras Mail, and he must have read the Swadesamitran. Whether he had access to newspapers from Bengal, we don't know. But we know that he actually met the prime disciple of Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. Who was the prime disciple of Ramakrishna Paramahamsa? Not Vivekananda. Vivekananda is a star student. One of his earliest students was Ramakrishnananda, who spent 11 years in Chennai. He says that, when he first met him, the idea of Swadeshi was sown in his heart like a seed. So these are all very tantalizing and cryptic references that Chidambaram Pillai makes in his writings. And we'll go into why these references are so cryptic, so tantalizing. We'll go into that shortly. So this is what the police are not able to find out enough about this man, which explains why he is talking about this idea. So he starts this. The first few months, what he does is he brings together the traders of Tuticorin and talks to them and convinces them that they should start a shipping line. So here once again, we have to see that one of the great characteristics of great men, in the 25 years that he lived after the collapse of the company, he never talked about his achievements. That is one very difficult part of the story. So we have to get information from various other sources. So he says that I brought together the traders and talked to them, and then first he suggests that they should charter a ship and use that ship to transport the goods. So this starts sometime in April 1906. So basically within a year of the Swadeshi movement. Slowly, as this gains traction, the first initial kind of sense of disbelief and discouragement that comes up, slowly it gains traction. And then the local agents of the British India Company decide that this could become a thorn in the flesh. We have to nip it in the bud. So they indulge in some hanky-panky, and one fine day the chartered ship doesn't turn up. So this person who had chartered the ship from Bombay, as you could have imagined, was a fellow Indian. He was easily bought over. So one fine day the ship doesn't turn up, and all the small fry around Chidambaram Pillai say, this is what will happen if you challenge the British. We should know our place. We are like the house crow, or like the chicken in the farm. We should not aspire to fly high like the eagles and falcons. So they gloat over it. But at this point, Chidambaram Pillai, this is where, this is the turning point. When they are about to give up, this man says that if we can't charter ships, we have a very simple alternative. He said, what? He said, if we can't charter ships, he said, we'll buy ship. They're shocked. They ask him whether they're hearing it right. Did you say we are going to buy a ship? Chidambaram Pillai says, no, I didn't say we are going to buy a ship. I said we are going to buy 2 ships. This is even more scandalous. And then they're asking him, where are you going to raise the money? He says, to raise capital, he says, we'll start a company. Well, no company has been registered in these parts for God knows how many years. I checked right now in Tuticorin. In the last few years, not a single public limited company has been registered in Tuticorin now, 100 years later. So this man says, to raise capital, we'll start a public limited company. Now, here one more question I have to ask. I want to ask the students of SEPT for this because you will be offended. But I have asked this question all over Tamil Nadu and other parts. I have asked people, what does the word limited mean in the title of many of the companies? It will not warm the heart of any teacher in this hall. The answer is, most students in India don't know what limited means. They don't know what limited liability means. I presume all of you know what limited liability is, right? All of you know what limited liability is? Yes, no? Okay. Simply put, that the liability of the investor is limited to the amount of money that he or she has put in the shares. This is the fundamental. This is one of the revolutionary methods found by capitalists, Dutch capitalists, to raise capital. Okay. So now, this is what I am trying to drive at. In 1906, if in 2024, bright young students do not know what limited liability is, even fewer people would have known what it was in 1906. So he has to sell the idea of what is limited liability to common people. So he registers a company, writes a prospectus, prepares memorandum of association and articles of association. These are just words for us. But 100 years ago, he has to think of all these things. How do you write a prospectus? And how do you write a prospectus not only in English but also in Tamil? Then how do you communicate this message to the people? And this is where what he does is, he goes to the people and talks to them about what a public limited company is, what a Swadeshi company is. Now, once again you are going to say, what is so great about talking to people? It is revolutionary to talk to people in their own languages in the early 20th century. Early 20th century, political communication, public communication meant speaking in English in halls. In hall meetings, 30, 40, 50 people gathered together. I am actually saying people. It's actually not people. 50, 60 men join together, upper caste men come together, and they speak in English, deliberate in English, and write elaborate petitions and resolutions and send it to the Gora Sahib. That is what politics meant. But that's not how you raise capital. So Chidambaram Pillai was the first to use the Tamil language as a medium of political communication. He goes to the people, talks to them on the streets. Public meetings are held in maidans, on the beachfront, in school premises. And I'm just summarizing this in a few words. And then he does this political communication, and there he's doing two things simultaneously. He is doing business for the purpose of politics. He combines these two, and it has a electrifying effect on the people. I am going by the references that the police are giving us. It is not from the nationalist newspapers. With that we get this information. But something more important than this, especially we as students and teachers and intellectuals, he is involved in the now and the immediate, right? He can't wait. He has to raise the money within a finite period of time. But even there, this prospectus, what is he talking about in this prospectus? This is where I'm going to quickly elaborate on some of the aspects of that prospectus. He says, yes, we are going to run ships, and this is to challenge the British monopoly on shipping. From there, he goes on into what can only be called dreams. First thing he says that, who can invest in this company? He says only Asians can invest in this company. No Europeans will be permitted to buy shares. Not that many Europeans were queuing up to buy shares, but he's making a political point. Then he says, as far as possible, these ships will be run by Indians and Asiatics. So once again you would ask, what is so great about it? To be in charge of a ship, as a captain, as an engineer, you need to be certified. In those days, all the certification came from the European nations. No Indian could actually. There were no Indians who were certified sailors, captains, engineers. But he's thinking about that. He says, we will try to get Japanese sailors if possible. That is the idea. Then he goes one step further. He says, now we may not have enough Indians who are qualified to run ships. So he says, we will start. He is going crazier by the minute. He says, going to start not navigational colleges to train Indians in the art of navigation. The people around him think he's gone completely mad. They were right. You know why? When was the first Indian Maritime University built? There is an Indian Maritime University. You know that, right? When was the Indian National Maritime University founded? 2007. 101 years after this man thinks about this. We have no clue to how this man, deep down south, not even a graduate, where is he getting these ideas from? Then he goes one step further. He says, we are not going to stop with running ships and training Indians to run these ships. He says, we are going to repair our own ships. When people, just their jaws drop, they said, how are we going to repair ships? Enough dockyards. He said, they will come once we build dry dockyards, which is for shipbuilding. So he's thinking of building ships. And here I want to bring in something contemporary. I'm sure most of you have watched the film Ponniyin Selvan. Yes? Yeah, Ponniyin Selvan is about the Chola Empire. The Cholas sent their naval ships up to Indonesia. But interestingly, you know what? Chidambaram Pillai was not aware of the Chola Empire at all. It is only from the 1920s, after the work of Nilakanta Shastri and others, that we know of the Chola Empire as a naval empire. So that is aside. So he has, at that point in time, none of this, he is even aware of any of these things, but he's thinking far ahead. So dry dockyards, shipbuilding. So he's really thinking big, and he actually sets out to actually go and buy ships. So he leaves within 7-8 months of this original idea. He is off to Bombay to go and buy 2 ships. And here I have to add some drama to it, but I am not adding this drama. This is from contemporary sources. He is married, and his young wife of 16 or 17 years old, she is heavily pregnant. And the midwife is telling him that, this is going to be a very complicated pregnancy. So what does Chidambaram Pillai do? He said, hell with the nation, hell with the ships, I am going to sit beside my wife and take care of my family. He said, no, I am not going to step back. I will not return until I buy a ship. So when his son is born, he is not here. He is actually here. He is here in Bombay. He finally succeeds in buying 2 ships. And now this becomes from the realm of pure theory and dreams, it actually becomes a reality. People who had been ridiculing him, and remember, most of the people who are ridiculing him were his own comrades and friends and his neighbors and others. They said, this is not something you can do. So we go step by step, and for about an year, there was a tough competition. When the tough competition is going on, the British are not going to be watching it silently. So immediately, every trick in the book, all the various unethical practices like rate cutting, deferred rebate system, free gifts for passengers, every trick is used to lure away custom from the Swadeshi company. The police start harassing the Swadeshis. At the port officer and the medical officer, they are giving trouble. So in the midst of all these things, the Swadeshi company is actually making slow inroads. And at this time, the political climate is also hotting up. 1907, the Surat Congress, the Congress session of the Indian National Congress at Surat takes place end of December 1907. Chidambaram Pillai comes with a bunch of young people to Surat. When he actually comes to Surat, until this point, he has not met Tilak. He has not met Aravind Ghosh. He has not met Lajpat Rai. Until this point, he is only one among many delegates, one of the members of the Congress. But in the 10 days that he spends in Surat and returns, now people are calling him the leader. He is all fired up, and he goes back to Tuticorin and he ups the ante. The movement that he is building, he makes it even more strident. Every day there are meetings on the seashore, on the beach in Tuticorin. He trains other leaders, younger men, to speak in public. And for about 2 months, we have police reports of that, where on the streets of Tuticorin and Tirunelveli, white men, white officers, white sahibs are terrified. A school principal of the local school principal says, until this point, whenever I used to bicycle, people used to give way. They used to do salam. Now whenever we walk on the streets, children are shouting, Bande Matram. The other day, a Jatka driver was purposely and deliberately, crossing my path and not letting me go ahead. And to give one more instance, how are you doing for time? Okay, so I'll give you one instance of the reach of the movement. Think 100 years before, when Brahmins and upper castes, their shaving needs were all performed, they were served by professional barbers coming from a certain community. So what happens with Chidambaram Pillai is that, all the quote unquote lower class people of Tirunelveli and Tuticorin are behind him. If the traders and merchants are behind him, the workers, the butchers, the Jatkavandi drivers, the barbers, they are also behind him. So there is one Indian who is working for the British India Company. So when the barber comes that particular day, he says something nasty about the Swadeshi movement. Immediately the barber tells him, I am not going to serve you anymore. He stops midway and leaves. You know that, the professional etiquette, all professions have etiquette. So what one barber has touched or left halfway will not be completed by another person. And especially in this case, because all of them were committed to the Swadeshi cause, nobody would come and finish the shave. So with police escort, this man was taken to Tirunelveli, 50-60 kilometers away, and from there another train to Madurai, and it took him a whole day for him to complete his shave. This was the level of Swadeshi propaganda that Chidambaram Pillai had said. So this entire town was practically under his thumb. And at this time, he once again does something else. There is a cotton mill in Tuticorin. There, he starts a strike. So on the beach front, the Swadeshi company is thriving. Inside the town, there is a major strike. So now this is when the government gets really panic. It sends a highly able professional officer to the ground. That's a long story, but to give only one instance, to bring it to the denouement, the collector summons Chidambaram Pillai to Tirunelveli, the nearby town, the district headquarters. The date is chosen because March 9th is the date when Bipin Chandra Pal, the great Bengali leader, is being released from prison. So that day is supposed to be celebrated as Swarajya Day. To subvert it, the collector calls Chidambaram Pillai to Tirunelveli. As it often happens, he is made to wait until afternoon. The proceedings start very late. Towards the end of the day, when the proceedings are going on, Chidambaram Pillai suddenly tells the collector, no less. Remember that in those days, collectors were not just executive officers. They were also judicial officers, collector and district magistrate. So suddenly Chidambaram Pillai tells the collector, can we adjourn the meeting? So the collector is curious, piqued. He said, why do you want to adjourn the meeting? He said, I want to go and give a public lecture today in the evening to welcome Bipin Chandra Pal. The collector becomes very furious. He says, the point of this proceedings is to actually stop you from giving public talks. Chidambaram Pillai is adamant. So late in the evening, with no notice, without WhatsApp messages, without social media, he is able to mobilize 2,000, 3,000 people. The people come up. He delivers a very stirring lecture, and very clearly it becomes clear that it's a point of no return. Finally, one more offer is made to Chidambaram Pillai. The collector tells him that I will let you go if you promise not to come back to Tuticorin and Tirunelveli for 6 months. So Chidambaram Pillai, it's an offer that he can't refuse, but Chidambaram Pillai actually refuses. He says, yes, I am willing to leave and not come back if you promise that you will not harm the Swadeshi company. Well, the collector says that is the very point of this exercise. So he immediately is arrested, and then a sedition case is launched against him. And this particular case is still a case law in sedition cases. Chidambaram Pillai is finally given 2 life imprisonments. You heard me right. 2 life imprisonments. A human being has only 1 life, but he has given 2 life imprisonments. One on the charge of delivering seditious speeches, and another on the charge of abetting seditious speeches. He's put in prison. Then that is a very long story. Probably I'll come back to it later. But the point about the shipping company is that, he gets these 2 ships. I'll tell you something about this image later. It is very blurred, but this is not even a picture. It is only a illustration. But I can't overemphasize the significance of this image. I'll come back to it later. The shipping company, for a while, is actually able to ensure that no trader ships the freight on the British ships for about 6 months. So with the arrest of Chidambaram Pillai, when in this whole business, there is also a group within the company which is working against him. We'll come back to it later if we have time. So from the high point of 1907, 1908, within a period of 5 to 6 months, with Chidambaram Pillai being arrested and put behind bars, the company quickly collapses. By 1911, the company is liquidated. Chidambaram Pillai is in prison. All over India, there has been a wave of repression let loose. Tilak is in Mandalay prison for 6 years. Aurobindo has taken refuge in Pondicherry. Entire Swadeshi movement had been crushed. So there are other things that we can talk about, but quickly let me add 1 or 2 things. By the time Chidambaram Pillai comes out from prison, he goes on appeal, and in 5 years he is released. When he is in prison, he is made to do undergo the harshest punishments. One is the check, which is the chakki, which is pulled by the bulls, right? In the prison, Chidambaram Pillai is made to pull the chakki. That is the kind of punishment that is inflicted upon him. So they are completely broken, and by the time he comes out of prison 5 years later, the world has completely changed. During this time, his entire family property had been wiped out. I am not giving the story from a storybook or a cinema. When he is sentenced to the double life imprisonment, his younger brother, goes mad on hearing the sentence. When he is in prison, his father dies. As the firstborn, he is the one who should do all the rituals, but he cannot even get parole. Then when he comes out of prison, this would be the last parting anecdote I'll give before I actually take 5-10 minutes to talk about the writing of the book. In 1915, Gandhi comes to Chennai from South Africa. He has returned from South Africa, met Gokhale, and is traveling all around India, meeting people, learning about India. So at that time, Chidambaram Pillai seeks a private interview with Gandhi. So Gandhi tells him that this is a private interview, so please come and see me at 6 in the morning. Chidambaram Pillai refuses to go. Can anybody guess why he says he can't go and see Gandhi at 6 in the morning? He says that I can't come at 6 in the morning because The first tram that leaves from near my home is at 6:30 in the morning. In my present condition, I don't have any means to hire a cart and arrange some other transport to see you at 6 in the morning. A person who had just 6 years earlier bought 2 ships worth 4 lakhs of rupees did not have 4 annas to pay for a jatka and go and see the future father of the nation. And final point that I want to make is the biggest challenge about writing this book is that when he was arrested and when he was given the sentence of 2 life imprisonments, you must just imagine the magnitude of the prison sentence. His guru Lokmanya Tilak got only 6 years. He was given 20 years, 2 life imprisonments. So the moment that news came, most of his friends and acquaintances destroyed all the letters and papers and documents they had with him. Most of them. And what little was left, in 1911, one of the British officials who were involved in the crushing of the Swadeshi company, called Robert Ashe, he was assassinated by a group of revolutionaries who had connections with the Bengali Manikdola conspiracy cases. With the assassination of a British officer, the few who had retained some of the papers, they destroyed everything. So no papers survived from any of Chidambaram Pillai's friends, family, acquaintances. So the challenge was how to write this book. So this book is based on fragmentary material collected from police records, newspaper reports, going to London, the entire records about the shipping company. Nothing has survived from India. So I had to go to the Lloyd's Register of Shipping. I had to go to the National Maritime Museum of England. And from there, the information that you are able to collect is only tidbits. They are little bits. From this, how do you write a story? This is the biggest challenge. And more importantly, the other challenge that I have is few outside Tamil Nadu are interested in people with unpronounceable names. My editor told me, this book is full of names and most of the names we can't pronounce. But what to do? This is the story we have to write. So the challenge was to introduce not just this great shipping enterprise. It's a dramatic story. I am sure all of you agree that this is a dramatic story. It doesn't get more dramatic than this. The David taking on Goliath and giving Goliath the run for his money. Instilling the fear of God in Goliath. He has done that. So it's a great dramatic story. But the issue is, how do you present the story? I have written many books in Tamil. On Chidambaram Pillai alone, I have written 7 books. But I wanted to write and reach people like you. So the way I went about this, what I have tried, whether I have been able to pull it off is a different matter, is to bring out the drama in any story. The most dramatic story can fall flat on its face if you do it poorly. But if you do it well, even a not so dramatic story can actually become a very dramatic story. And the most important challenge is to build a narrative. How do you build a narrative? With little bits of information. This policeman says, I went behind him, he met this fellow. Some other information talks about how the port officer did such and such a thing to the Swadeshi volunteer. Then there is another report about some letter exchange between the governor and the police officer. The police officer exchanging letters with the district collector. So these kind of fragmentary information and some fragmentary newspaper reports. So you have to look carefully. Sometimes you can come up with nuggets. I'll give you 2 instances. In this entire story, the only place where I got a description of the ship was from, of all places, the Maratha newspaper. The Maratha newspaper gave a description of the reception that was given when the first ships came from Europe to Bombay. So that was one. The other dramatic story was that I mentioned the assassination of this white officer, right? So I tried to trace the family of this white man, and I succeeded in meeting the grandson of that British officer. One of the most epiphanic moments in my life. So I flew in from London to Ireland. The grandson was supposed to be waiting there for me. I am actually fearful, right? I am studying the man who has killed that person's grandfather. I don't know how he is going to turn up. Is he going to turn up with 3 or 4 gundas with cycle chains and rods and going to give me a thorough beating? So, and I see him, he's a gentleman, he's tall with thick glasses, but he is also perturbed. He doesn't know what to say. So it took us a while to warm up, and then now we have become friends. And the most amazing thing is that, he had so many records. He had so many papers. Some crucial papers which throw light on how the shipping company was crushed. I found the papers with him. So these are the kinds of information that I tried to weave it together. And one way in which I tried to build interest in the story was by, if you look at the title of the chapter titles, you'd see that I have used a number of marine metaphors. In fact, the whole book is teeming with, once again, that is a marine metaphor, if I may say so. So the whole book is teeming with idioms, and that's when you realize that, what a powerful hold that the sea has had over human civilization. That our entire language is suffused with the language of the sea, of the nautical, of the navigatory, of the maritime. So this is how I tried to build these little bits of information into a narrative. And the more questions that I asked, and the more answers that I tried to give, more and more questions came up. And you will find that in this book there are a lot of questions. The one question that will linger with me, and that's where I will end my talk, is where does this So where does our man, where does our hero, where does he get these ideas? So he wants to buy a ship. How do you go about buying a ship? Let us say a ship costs 50 crores of rupees. I give you 50 crores of rupees. How do you buy a ship? Do you log on to Amazon.in and say, I want to buy a ship, deliver it between 4 and 5 on a Saturday? And they make a counter offer and say, if the ship is delivery is late by 30 minutes, we'll give it to you free. I mean, I simply can't conceive of how this man buys a ship. How do you buy a ship? How do you think of these things? So I'd say, this one big lesson. I started working on this book when I was 14 years old. When I first went to the Tamil Nadu archives, they turned me away from the archives because I was in my school uniform. They said school children can't come into the archives. So this is what our country is, right? You cannot think big, you cannot dream big. So in a country like this, you have somebody who dreamt big, who almost realized that dream, and he actually instilled the fear of God in his enemies. There's no doubt about it. So that's my story. So I'm happy to take. As you think of stories, as you think of questions or poses, let me explain one or two things. So this is the biggest, one of the biggest investments that I've ever made in my life was on this image. 41 years ago, I spent 1 rupee on this image, and it was one of the biggest and most fruitful investments, because in those days photocopying cost 1 rupee a page. That was a lot of money. In 1982, it was a lot of money. I saw the copy of the prospectus, the first prospectus issued by the company. First page had this image, and the other 3 pages were text. So I said, should I spend 4 rupees and photocopy all the 4 pages, or save 1 rupee, 1 whole rupee? It's after all an image. What is so great about this image? It's not even clear. So I went to the photocopying shop, paid 3 rupees, got the pages photocopied, and then when I was about to leave, I said, okay, let me forego my evening tiffin, let me photocopy this. And I photocopied this. This is the only known image of the ship, Galia ship, that Chidambaram Pillai bought. That document doesn't exist anymore. Don't ask me. That is the state of Indian archives, Indian libraries. Books that you saw 20, 30 years ago might not actually exist anymore. The documents that I saw many, many years ago have been lost, they have vanished, they have disappeared, they have disintegrated. So if I had not spent that 1 rupee, this image would not have survived. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving us the honor to learn from you today. On behalf of SEPT University, we extend our heartfelt gratitude towards you. We shall now begin the question and answers session. So I encourage all of you to be as interactive as possible. If anyone wishes to purchase sir's book and learn more about it, they're available for sale here. So kindly reach out for that.
So when he was in prison, he wrote an autobiography in verse form. Okay, firstly, this very interesting thing is autobiographies. I am wary of speaking about autobiographies with Trideep sitting right in front of me. Autobiography is a very modern genre. Okay? In Tamil, there are practically no autobiographies in the 19th century. When I say that, there were a few autobiographies, but they were not published until much later. So when Chidambaram Pillai wrote this autobiography, he was not aware of earlier existing autobiographies. I presume he wrote it in verse form because I think if he wrote it in prose, it would self-incriminate him, So he probably that was the reason why he never wrote that in prose but in poetry. So the form of poetry is such that yes, it's aesthetically it's a very interesting form, but it's a pain in the neck for historians, because you spend half the time trying to decipher, trying to figure out what he is saying and what he is not saying. So it does give you information, but it seems that like many of the great, that is probably a very Indian trait. We kind of undervalue our own importance. So to talk about our own achievement is seen as what smaller men do. This is what we academics, which is the synonym for smaller men and women, we do know. We talk about ourselves, we talk about our greatest glories, how we say, how this is a great advance in historiography, this is how we do our review of literature. But great men, great women, they don't talk about their achievements. And I'm so furious with our man, our hero, that he was so self-effacing. He came out of prison and lived for 24 years afterwards. Never talked about how we went about doing it, what were the challenges, why it failed, how it was crushed, who were the people who backstabbed him, who were the ones who let him down. We don't know. So that is it. So that is the autobiography, and this autobiography was published only after his death, not in his own lifetime. That is what I meant by cryptic references. Somebody there.
You mentioned that you met Robert Ash's grandson, right? How was your interaction? What would you even talk about? It's such a, interesting subject because it's his own grandfather who was assassinated, right?
Okay. That family is a Anglo-Irish family, but very interesting things. Certain things, life is very strange. It is not the black and white of Hollywood movie, of Bollywood movies or Tamil movies. A lot of shades of grey. First thing that is interesting is Ash's wife was seriously unwell. So when around the time of Ash's death, if you look at all the correspondence and documents, the impression you would get is that his wife is going to die very soon. But what happened? Ash died. And the wife survived him by 45 years. And if I may say so, during this 45 years, whatever she did, she would qualify perfectly for the description of Pativrata. I don't know whether she observed Karva Chauth or anything like that, but very close to it. She kept the memory of her husband alive all through those 45 years. And something very strange is that the next irony is Ash left behind 4 children. One of them was a boy. You would have thought that, after such a brutal tragedy in the family, nobody would want to have anything to do with India. That son joined the Indian army. He saw partition. And what this grandson tells me is that my father never forgave Mountbatten. He says, my father fully put the responsibility of the violence of partition to the ham-handed manner in which Mountbatten handled the whole thing. That is there. What is it? And very strangely, the family, despite their wish, they have never been able to come back to India. But they have a healthy interest, like all, he's a liberal, so keep space with everything that's happening. So he had many questions. They had read Tagore. They had read 1 or 2 novels which were set in this particular background. So it was a very curious thing. And the most touching thing was, after I had met them, the centenary of the assassination came up in 2011. So I asked him, can you send a message? Can you write a message on this occasion? He wrote a very magnanimous message which was addressed to the children of the assassin Vanchi. Basically, the sum of that message is this. He said, no, our forefathers, forebears, in the course of their duty, they make mistakes. It is we who have to live with the fallout of such crimes and mistakes. We should try to transcend those differences and see what binds us. So it was a very, very touching and moving image. So that is, so I have written a long piece on that called In Search of Ash. So this is one of the things about research. Don't ever reduce research to, grades or, degrees or some concrete material achievement. I think, research is something that should transform you. It should transform you. It should change you. You should not be the same person that you set out in the beginning. At the end, you should be a transformed person. And ultimately, it should lead you to some understanding of what life is all about. So this is, I can give you many, many stories about how I went about writing. Just to give one or two more, as people think of other pursuits. One very fruitful part of my work was that it is through my book that the great grandchildren of some of those who played a part in this shipping company got to know about that. They read the book and said, listen, you have written about our great grandfather. We didn't know anything about it. I'll give you one instance. The first promoter of the shipping company, called S.V. Nallaperumal Pillai, on the occasion of his 50th death anniversary in 1989, an insertion was taken in the Hindu with the picture of that man. It says, what all he had done. He is a philanthropist, he was the founder of so and so school, he was chairman of municipal council, he was president of war relief fund, half a dozen things. It makes no mention of what would be the greatest achievement. Could there be a greater achievement than promoting this shipping company? They were not aware of it. So after reading the book, so they invited me home, they gave me a silken brocade, provided a, feast for me, these things happen. That is one. The other case was, I went in search of one particular person. I found, I traced the son of one of Chidambaram Pillai's associates. So I traced the house, I went into the house, stepped in, and the old man came out. He said, "Who are you?" I said, "I am so and so. I have come to find out more about your father, Subramanya Pillai." He said, "If you want to take the name of that bloody scoundrel, don't even step into my house." That is what he had to say about his father. So this is not about research. This does not, enrich my research, but it enriches me as a person. When I was a young boy, I thought, what a nasty son he is. But in my old age, I think of all the things. To my mind, Mahatma Gandhi and his first son come to my mind. Okay? Now I understand. I can sympathize with Harilal. My esteem for Gandhi doesn't go down one bit. But I understand why Harilal became, or I think I understand why Harilal did what he did or became what he became. So this is what life is. Anything about writing? You want to ask me something about writing?
Sir, I would like to ask that how did you change your research into a book, like the small pieces of research which you did into a book?
See, I think you have to find what connects these bits of information. And I would say that, many times people think that, it is easier to write if you have more information. Right? Everybody thinks, if you have lots of information, you can write better. But actually, if you have too much material, it actually weighs you down. It doesn't give you enough scope to. Have you seen the Tamil kolam, the Rangoli? Yeah, the kolam is how you draw with, dots. There should be an optimal number of dots. If there are too many dots, you can't draw a column. For too few dots, you can't do a column. And the lines should not touch the dots, right? That is the trick. If the lines touch the dots, the column fails. So data is like that. Data is there, it is a given. How you weave around it, how you navigate it, that is the challenge. So that is the first red herring that you have to push. Too much information, it is not going to give you any elbow room. Then when there is a paucity of information, you have to bring in your, I hesitate to use this word because it can be easily misunderstood. Imagination. You need imagination to fill in gaps, especially when it comes to motivation. What motivated so and so to do these things? Why does Gandhi chose salt rather than something else? So this is, motivations are very difficult. That you have to speculate. But it is the gaps that let you imagine things. So I'll give you the analogy of archaeology. All of you must be familiar with archaeology. So what do archaeologists find? They find, a few stones, pot shreds, some grains, some broken pots, few bones. None of them speak, right? They're just discrete objects. But you find archaeologists not only tell you stories, they're able to tell you credible stories, stories that actually are able to inform you and enlighten you about your own past. So that is one extreme. We are writing using written material, so it's different. So the idea is to, once again, remember what is that? Wright Mill's book. It's called the sociological imagination, right? Okay, why is he talking about imagination? So what you see, nothing is out there. It is we who give meaning to those things. So you have to bring these disparate elements together and see how to string them together and which sequence gives you the most purchase. That is the challenge. That I would say that this imagination doesn't come straight from the heavens. Only rare people, only Kalidasa and Tenali Rama have Vagdevi come and write on their tongues. We are all lesser mortals. So the only way how we can learn to write is to read a lot. There is no alternative to reading. If you read good stuff, the likelihood of you writing good stuff increases. I know Diana and others are putting a lot of work trying to teach you in a structured manner. That is required, but this is also there. Read a lot, and when you read, also look at the technique of their writing. Like a carpet, you should not look at only the outer surface. You should also see behind, what goes behind. So you read for edification, read for enjoyment, read for style, and then read for its mechanics. One interesting way is to pick up a very good essay and see what is their opening gambit. What is the title? You'd see that the best writers can give an extraordinary title, that actually buttonholes you and pulls you into the text. See how they end a text, how they progress from section to section. There's somebody here?
Sir, so I have two questions for you. One is, how did he manage to get the funds for like 2 ships? How did Mr. Chidambaram manage to find money for the 2 ships? And the second one is, how did he lead his life after he came back from the prison? Did he try to restart the company again, or did he try to gather people again? That is my question.
So as I said, this was registered as a public limited company with the authorized capital of 10 lakhs. He was able to, the company was able to raise 6.5 lakhs as capital, half of which even his enemies said that he had raised it through his own personal efforts. Okay, that was one. When he was arrested and imprisoned and sentenced, That sympathy wave led to raising another lakh. So when the company collapsed, it had a share capital of something like, I have the numbers, some 7.8 lakhs or something. That was one thing. But one of the difficulties that the company fell into is that it's a criticism that was made both contemporaneously and later, is that they said that the company collapsed not because of its politics or because it was crushed, because they were inexperienced. Well, I don't buy that argument. How do you get experience? Right? You have to jump, you have to take the plunge before you learn to swim. That's one. And I can also ask counter questions. All the companies started by IIM graduates, they are all successful. So many companies have failed. So that is one aspect. So one problem was that it was undercapitalized, no doubt about it. How would you raise capital in a poor country? That was the big challenge. Now in 2024, is it easy to raise 10 or 20 lakhs for an ordinary person? Okay, so that is one. The ships were bought from Europe, and the payment was made in installments. So one of the problems was the huge interest. So this was like, he was fighting battles on all fronts. There was not one battle that he was fighting. So he was trying to manage everything. And apart from all these challenges, there are people here, some people who are criticizing him. You have bought 2 Swadeshi ships. They are called Galia and Lavo. Why don't you name them after Dadabhai Nauroji or Lokmanya Tilak or Akbar? I said, yes, but how many things will this man do? Right? Changing the name of a ship is not just painting it over. Right? It is a process. And you are not helping this man by giving this kind of idealistic advice. Okay? So that was one aspect. So after prison, he comes out of prison, he has lost his Vakil Sanad. So he cannot, if you are charged and convicted under certain sections of IPC, Indian Penal Code, any crime that involves moral turpitude, right? That is the term. So any crime that involves moral turpitude, if one is convicted of that, that person's certificate for practicing in the court becomes null and void. So he is able to get that certificate back only after 12 years, by the time he is a spent force. So I was able to find some of the letters that his wife wrote. That story of his wife is even more tragic story than this. His wife Meenakshi was 12 years old when she got married. By the time she was 16, she had 2 sons. By the time she was 18, her husband was in prison for crimes which I'm sure few people would have understood at that time. Anybody else would have just collapsed. What did this young girl do? I'd say she's a young girl, right? 18. She would not have been able to join SEPT. She would still be in school if she had gone to school. With her elder brother, she went and lived wherever her husband lived. Carried on all the correspondence. Raised money for the defense. Corresponded with jail authorities. Corresponded with the governor. Petitioned King George and the Secretary of State for India. And that bunch of letters that I saw is actually, I said letters that went from the family were all destroyed, right? Remember that? Because everybody was scared. So she, for whatever reason, had a notebook where she had kept copies of these letters First thing that struck me was the the thorough mastery of the language. And the language comes straight from her heart. It is bristling with literary allusions. If you have time, I will give 2 instances. I know we are really running out of time. So one letter is addressed to Chidambaram Pillai's close friend, who has become a sannyasi. Okay? She writes a letter to that person. Dear brother, I read your recent book, where you have sung the glories of being a sannyasi, and you have undermined the life of a householder. Okay? He says, how can a sannyasi function when the household is not doing well? Without the woman in the home, how will your practices of austerity and sannyasi thrive? She is asking at the age of 19. And then the one letter which is, I cannot forget this letter. She says, we have sold all our property. All my jewels are pledged. Taken loans from every conceivable source. Nothing is left. At this stage, I am willing to do coolie work as long as it doesn't compromise my honor. Now tell me, who is a bigger hero? The man who runs a shipping company, or the 19-year-old girl who's writing this? And the tragic thing is that, the only photograph of her that survives is the one that she took with her husband. No picture of her survives from after 1908, even though she lived until 1951. When are we going to write their stories? What would she have undergone? Where all she went? She went and lived in Kannur. Safan, you will remember. From Tirunelveli, purposely he was put in Kannur, which is practically in Karnataka. So, I could go on endlessly. I'm sorry, I've overshot my time.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you again for this wonderful opportunity. So with this, our first perspective session comes to an end. Those who wish to purchase the books can kindly go and reach out for them. Thank you so much.
Let me interrupt the departure and say this. An absolute honor for any institution to have Venkatachalapati come and talk to us. We were joking with Diana in the afternoon that we've known each other even before she was born, which says something about our friendship and how long we go back. It's not about friendship. It's about the kind of deep scholarship, commitment, empathy that a scholar brings to what she or he does. And Chala has been one of those people in this country who has exemplified what measure that you have for scholarship. So thank you very much for what you do. And great that we had you here. Bad lunch, but we'll make up. Right? So thank you.